Hey, Chief.
Hi. Hey, Chief. I'm going. Chris, this is Police Chief Troy Bacon. Hi. Nice to meet you. Chief is brand new.
So I thought I'd be seen for a little bit. It's always nice to.
You know where it is, Chris, right? Yeah, the only things you'll have to do with that is which of the sergeants.
Yeah.
That's the only thing. And if we had like 2 rounds coming up, I would say, oh, play one and play the other. That's the only reason why you want to just say
That's the one. Right procedure for whatever other reason that we didn't do this.
No, the last time we did it, I was just gonna do the chief, sergeant report, and myself, and then Rick said, hey, you mind if I bring up the LT? It's been nice. We had enough questions to go around for everybody, it's good to get everyone's done. What was your impression of?
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by pound.
Chief, no.
Enter your participant ID followed by pound. Otherwise, just. You are in the meeting now. There is one other participant in the meeting. This meeting is being recorded.
Hey, Jim. Jim, are you able to hear?
Yes, I am, Christine.
Okay, thank you. And call, a little pivot there. I'll call the Selectmen's Workshop here in the town of Adams to order on Wednesday, July 29th. Just wanted to make it clear that this meeting is being conducted remotely, as we do have our Vice Chairman, Jim Bush, who is Zooming in. Jim, thank you for participating via Zoom tonight. And then this meeting is being recorded, so that if anybody did want access, they would have that. I will try to leave the participant window open so that if anybody else joins, everyone in the room will see who else has joined us. I will do my best to handle all of those logistics. Just for way of introduction, so you know everybody who's in the room, my name is Christine Hoyt. I'm the chair of the Board of Selectmen. I'll go to my right, and I'll have everybody introduce themselves.
I'm John Wall. Rick White. Joe Novak.
That's the 5-person board, because Jim can wave, he's on the screen. You know our town administrator, our DPW director, and our interim police chief, Troy Bacon. And Deb Dunlap, who I think you've been communicating with as well. So that's everybody who's in the room. Jim, did you get all of that?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So with that, under new business, the first item is the wastewater treatment facility and pump station capital needs assessment. I'm going to turn things over to Jay Green, who's just going to give a brief introduction. Jim, you just need to give me a thumbs up if you can hear Jay.
I'll use my outside voice, Jim. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Neighbor can hear you too.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll go back to February 2019 or so, when just around the time that I started, in my walk around for town facilities and in my conversations with town staff and selectmen, it became apparent early on that the town knew it needed to invest from a capital standpoint in the wastewater plant. And then once I took the job and spent more time with Walt and Bob, they indicated and took me for a tour, showing the age of the plant, which was built in 1968 and went online in 1971. It was built for 10 million gallons a day when we haven't had industry, particularly paper and effluent. We now average, give or take, about 2 million gallons a day. We have a federal discharge permit, and the EPA and DEP regulate how we operate the plant and what we're permitted to discharge into the river in the outfall. The plant, as you folks know, you've all been around for quite some time, received about a $3 million upgrade in 2007, 2008. We're still carrying the debt on that. That's approximately $175,000 on our budget annually. It's just the principal. And there's about, I think, $10,000 in interest that we pay on that as well. We have our 7-person staff at the plant, and it's a significant portion of our budget. Bob and I sat down probably late winter last year, and we wanted to take some steps forward with the capital improvement plan. How are we going to do this? Obviously, it's beyond town staff, so we needed to hire an engineering firm. Ty and Bond had the contract in 2007, 2008, so they had a lot of the plans already. They were familiar with the upgrades of the plant, upgrades with the process and systems that we use. So we felt it made sense to go with Ty and Bond. For my time in our staff. So then you folks, I believe sometime in February, we got together, pre-COVID times. We sat down, we had a workshop, and Ty and Bond made the presentation in terms of what type of work they were going to do. So we have a 3-task contract with Ty and Bond, capital improvement plan, the user rate study, and the asset management grant application. Tonight, for the most part, we're going to hear on the capital improvement side of it. But as we discussed at the workshop, a lot of this is inextricably intertwined with the decision of us whether or not we're going to go to a user fee. So if we go to a user fee, that user fee, we should know to a certain extent what we're going to put in the plant from a capital standpoint. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg conversation. So we're taking this one step at a time. I'll just cut to the chase. Overall, right now, it's about $4.5 to $5 million, depending on what we want to do. However, the plant is in a state of good repair, but it is getting old and does need to be some updates. So that's kind of the overarching point of view. We've had so much going on over the last few months. I just wanted to get everybody back up to speed and why we're here tonight. Miles Moffitt and Chris Bone from Ty and Bond, both vice presidents. They're familiar with the plant, and I'm going to turn it over to them. Okay.
If you want to go to the next slide, I think there's a project goals piece in there.
Yep.
Yeah, Jay did a great job introducing our scope. I'll introduce myself first. Chris Bone with Ty and Bond. I've been with Ty and Bond since 1999. Not my first project, but early on, one of the first things I was doing was working with the town of Adams. So we did some planning work for the 2007 upgrade, and then I was involved heavily in the design. So I know this plant very well. I was with it all the way through construction. So, you know, it's fun for me to come back and see something that was built 15 years ago and talk about the next step. We are essentially done with the capital improvement plan. We've been through the work associated with that plan. We've met with town staff, and then are happy to be here to present it. The process that we did and the goals really to focus on like a 10-year planning period and what would need to be done at this plant to allow it to reliably and safely serve the town for the next 10 years. So we started by interviewing the folks that know the plant the best, which are the staff that are maintaining the plant every day. And spent several hours with them going through in a very regimented way, piece by piece, every part of the plant, every piece of process equipment, and got some great feedback on where they're putting their time, where they think their vulnerabilities are, where they feel comfortable continuing to maintain equipment. So that was a very helpful first step for us. And then we then went to the plant and did our own assessment of plant condition. And really the report is pulling those two together. We validated plant operating data just to confirm that the plant is reliably meeting permit and is functioning the way it should from the operational data perspective. Went through from a process by process perspective, and we'll talk about that in more detail today, and looked at each process component of the plant, where we saw the capital needs and then came up with a list of recommendations, and then what costs associated with each of those recommendations. We put them into 3 buckets, what we would call high priority improvements, something that you really need to focus on, in our opinion, in the next several years. Medium priority improvements, which are things that, within this 10-year planning cycle you should focus on. And then lower priority improvements, something that might become important if conditions change at the plant, or if the economic environment changes, where you're spending your money, that might be something we want to look for long term. We didn't look at things that, outside of that 10-year planning period, you may eventually do. So that's kind of how we put the bars on what we're looking at. So, plant history, just reiterate some of what Jay previously stated. This plant was constructed in 1968. By and large, what's there today was what was constructed in 1968. There was that 2006, 2007 upgrade that Jay was talking about. That was a pretty limited scope, right? We started, with a slightly bigger project at the time, and the town had limited financial resources, at that time. So the scope was really narrowed quite a bit. And essentially what we did is replace half of the plant. So there's 2 process trains that run through this plant, and we replaced half of the equipment. So we did half the aeration system, we did half the clarifiers. A lot of the pumps we didn't touch because they're being well maintained. We did some chemical upgrades, things like that. We'll touch on some of that as they go through. But we didn't touch everything. And again, a lot of what's there today, and a very difficult, abrasive, corrosive service, has been serving the town well for 50 years. Step through the next slide.
I can all hear all right?
And Jim, you can hear okay?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Certainly.
Yeah, no, please, yeah.
So, this was constructed 50 years ago, and it was built, as Jay indicated, for 10 million gallons a day.
Correct.
And today, the average, I would imagine, is, as Jay has stated, is about 2 million gallons a day. Probably not going to get much more than that in the near future, or the long distance, don't know, but.
Agreed, unlikely you're going to see major growth, right, yeah.
When you did your study, was there any consideration to, because we just did this back in 2006, 2.8, which is probably more than that today's dollars.
Yes.
And we replaced half, and we're still paying on it.
Yep.
I was gonna ask Jay how many years we got left on that. And we're gonna,
5.
thank you, and then we're looking to take out another, bond, to, so it seems like, it's 15 years ago, then it's gonna be, then 10 years from now, we're gonna have to come back, and then 5 years from now, the way the trend seems to be going, and I've been there, I understand the situation. Was there any thought put into, reducing the size of the plant and investing in, shutting down some areas and building some new areas and build a wastewater treatment plant that meets the town's needs at 2,500 gallons a day for future expansion? Was there any thought put into that, so we don't have to go back? Maybe that could last us 30, 40 years, we wouldn't have to come back and have to, it seems to me that the amount of times you go to get bonds is going to increase as we go, because the plant is now 50, and then it's gonna get older,
Yeah, that's a great question. We were very aware that you've got a 10 million gallon per day plant with just 2 million gallons a day going through it. So that influenced a lot of our recommendations at the end of the day. There's some areas where we've got a tremendous amount of built-in redundancy already, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to put money into, in my opinion, into areas where if one piece of equipment fails, you've got 2 more that could equally serve what that one is doing and quite fix it. So it definitely influenced the scope of the recommendations we were making and allowed us to decrease them. Your bigger question is, do you take this 10 million gallon per day plant and make something that's in line with your current permit, which is, I think it's got a diesel limit, what, 3.5 inch D or something like that. And you could definitely do that. It would be pretty expensive project to do that. And for my mind, what would be the driver, that would, you know, make me start to think about those kinds of things? If you had a significant permit change, where you're gonna be doing major capital upgrades at that plant, we'll talk about some of those later if you want, but those kinds of things might probably step back and look at what would be driving me to put in, you know, $15 million into this plant rather than these smaller incremental capital upgrades. The plant overall, even though it's 50 years old, if you look at a concrete, you know, structure of buildings, that was built really well 50 years ago. I mean, it's built like a rock. So it's not like you've got something that's completely falling in. It's just the mechanical equipment, the electrical equipment, a lot of those kinds of things have seen their day. And then there's some legitimate safety issues that we would want to have the town consider addressing. So it's a great question. It would be a bigger project to downsize the plant.
But it'd be an investment today to reduce costs, later down the line, that's a tough sell also.
Yeah. Just I'll follow up on that. I mean, the challenge for me is, you know, as engineers, we're looking at a permit we have today, and you make decisions based on that permit, and you're always trying to talk to the regulators who will never give you straight answers, always about what the future permits are gonna be, you know, what you're gonna need to do relative to, phosphorus removal in the future, things like that. Building something today that would limit what you're gonna do in the future, you don't wanna build a $50 million upgrade now, and then 8 years from now, get a permit limit that would force you to rethink or regret some of the things you do today. So, it's just being cautious about how you spend your money is something we're all trying to figure out, how you're gonna get that investment.
Just one quick thing, my thought was that keep the best parts that we have, eliminate some of the other areas that need a lot of work and continuously need a lot of work, reduce the blueprint down to 2,500 gallons a day, going forward, and maybe, you know, it would cost more, and I would imagine, no question, but, you know, to try to come up with, so anyways, that's just a thought, thought about that.
Just two thoughts on that, John. Number one, when I walked through the plant, and I realized what capacity it had, I said about it, there's a lot of redundancy here. And I learned that essentially all of the pump systems were built in triplicate. So you have lead, lag, and standby on some of it, and you get longer pump life out of a lot of this material because you can cycle that equipment. Also, with the aeration basins, 3 are shut down because they have the original electrical equipment mixing motors on them. Those are the 3 furthest ones. You go back to the overhead, Christine, back one slide, please. So if you see on that right here, these are the aeration basins, 1, 2, and 3 are shut down. Those have the original motors on them, which are very expensive to power up, because as soon as you give them power, they're at full 480 volts, and that draws a lot from the grid. 4, 5, and 6 were upgraded and have been maintained with variable frequency drives. So when they start at a slower electrical draw, and we don't get high demand costs on the electricity. But if we were able to update all the clear card number 2 and which will put less hours in some of the equipment. That's one advantage of keeping it. And number 2, as I learned today, at the Fishkill facility, they're just adding really 2, they're doing a lot of other work, but essentially 2 major components, and that price tag is $75 million. So no matter what we do with this plant, no matter how we touch it, boy, it's got a huge price tag on it. So just some thoughts.
And just, Jay, how many gallons does Pittsfield use on average a day?
Fishkill's built to handle 20 to 25 million gallons a day. And they do hit that occasionally, so that is their average, give or take. They also take septic. They also receive effluent from Dalton, and I believe a part of Lennox as well. And one of the other things that I asked the guys to look at, and we'll talk about tonight, is, so we have this capacity in the plant. We know we're never going to get Brightwater paper back or any of our other industrial users. But because we do have capacity, why not we take septic? We can charge for that, particularly if we're going to go to a user fee. we can charge septic haulers for putting septic in. We have the mechanical and the fluid capacity, but one of the things I learned today to be cautious about is what that does to the water chemistry, because there is a cost to that too. The guys will talk about that later, but part of the upgrade, I would hope, will be to allow us to charge for septic, because there's only one way to Williamstown, really, and it passes us. So I'm thinking we might be able to get some of that business from water quality.
Thank you. So Chris, before you continue, and Robert, I know Bob couldn't be here tonight, but when we have the commented that right now, half to 4 million gallons of water, with everything that's gone on with COVID, that people have been home and that we are using a lot more of the plants than we have been. Do you remember that number? What?
It's about that.
Okay,
It's about that, and it's dropped. It's almost back to average normal.
almost back to.
And that's why we have a higher chemical cost, because the treatment, chemicals reprocessing more.
So from a capacity standpoint,
Right.
if the town was full and everyone was home and all of that, we would be closer to 4, and then we would have this additional capacity of 6 at this point.
Yep.
That's what I'm hearing.
Not really a fixed cost.
No.
You've got a permit limit that doesn't allow you to take the full energy anymore, so you have to raise it up a little bit, so.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
yeah.
And Jim has a question? Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I have a question. It's my understanding that we're getting permitted for the section of the plant we're using. The other section is plant we're not being permitted for yet. Is this correct?
Yeah, I don't fully know your permit history, like right off the top of my head, Jim. The plant used to have a higher permitted capacity, and when nutrient limits and things like that were coming towards the town made a decision to de-rate the hydraulic capacity to allow the concentration, I believe, and some of the nutrients to come up a little bit. So you don't have the same permit flow rating as the plant used to have. It's more, the permit is more aligned with what the actual flows are these days, which has allowed some more creative things to happen with, some of the nutrients that are discharged from the plant to the river. So from an equipment perspective, you've got a plant that's rated for, the design perspective, 10 MGD, but from a permit, you've got a much lower permit than these days. I don't know if that answered your question fully, but.
Okay, so if we were to reach the permit max that we have right now, we'd have to go through a whole permitting process to move this plant forward to use?
I doubt the plant would be in a situation, or the town would be in a situation where you would need to increase your flow capacity because of the current flow going into the plant and the rated capacity of the plant. You're not getting over that permit limit, really ever. You may bang up against it during like wet weather events where you get a little bit of extra flow to the plant during rain events or snow melts and things like that. But I don't think you're in a situation where you need to be considering a permit increase. Low flow or really high strength wastewater. So if you're not going to push up against the flow limit taking septic, you're going to push up against treatment capacity of the equipment to handle that extra like biological load from the really high strength wastewater on septic. So I don't think you need to be thinking about increasing your NIPSI permit.
Okay, thank you.
NPDES,
Yeah.
National Pollutant Discharge. Okay.
National Pollution Discharge Elimination.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. We're engineers, we talk in acronyms, sorry. My goal in these slides is to kind of step through them pretty quickly, just to give you a flavor of what we were seeing. We wrote a report that was, 70 or 80 pages of text and several hundred pages of attachments. I just want to give you a flavor for what we saw more than anything else. There's some cost tables on the back end of this. My intent isn't to go through those in any gory detail, really just to give you a broader understanding of what we're seeing at the plant, just to help you understand some of the details that the discussions happen. This is the headworks area of the plant, so we've got half a dozen slides or so here with different areas of the plant. The headworks is really where the wastewater first enters the plant, so it's coming in from a manhole outside of the plant into this below-grade structure, at the front edge of the plant when you first drive in. It's an area where you can see in the bottom right, there is a grinder, so wastewater is flowing through that grinder, which is like a bunch of saw blades that are rotating like this and are chopping up rags and large debris into smaller pieces so that it doesn't clog downstream equipment. And then it flows into two wet wells, and you can kind of see one of them in the upper left picture, which then are used by the pumps to suck out and pump into the plant. Headworks overall is in, I would call, fair condition. It's a very corrosive environment. The HVAC is essentially fallen into a stage of disrepair due to the corrosive environment. So you're not getting a lot of new fresh air in there that would help minimize corrosion in the future. Structurally, it's in okay shape, but we are seeing, and there's a number of areas like that in the upper right where concrete is starting to fail and you're getting some exposed rebar. You know, if that is left unattended for a longer period of time, it does lead to more significant structural repairs. So this is an opportunity to do some spot repairs now to extend life. Is what we're looking at here. There's safety issues throughout this plant. You're going to hear the word tow boards quite a bit. You can see a picture of in the upper left where somebody's standing there. You've got aluminum handrail that prevents people from falling into the plant. So that the handrail generally looks like it's in okay condition, although there's certainly some corrosion issues in the headworks. What the plant doesn't have throughout are tow boards. Tow boards are basically aluminum plate or steel plate or whatever you want to build it out of at the bottom of the rail that will prevent tools and things from being kicked into the tank. But more importantly, if somebody ever slipped, it's that bottom safety rail, and you know you can get some very slippery surfaces for a lot of reasons in wastewater plants. That becomes dangerous. If somebody ever fell into the tank, it would be an extremely dangerous high-risk situation to be in. So that's a recommendation. They're not crazy expensive, but you've got a lot of handrails, so it does tend to add up, and you'll see those kinds of recommendations in a number of places throughout the report. So you know, just overall here, it's grading and guardrail, type safety improvements. There's some door hardware that's corroded, concrete repairs. There's a slide gate between the two wet well chambers that's 1968 vintage. It certainly could use some upgrades. And then the biggest cost item here is really HVAC upgrades that would help buy this overall area of the plant. We did look at replacing the grinder with what's called an automatically clean screen, which is essentially a bar rack with very fine bars where you would break the material out. The benefit of that is you get that debris out of the system right away rather than grinding it. You have to handle it, which becomes a challenge. The downside of a grinder is you chop everything up in little pieces, and then as it bounces around in the plant, they come back together, and you get ropes and things like that can be challenging to deal with. And then some of the products that we use for households these days, some of the baby wipes and those kinds of like really great products from our household perspective are really tough at wastewater plants. They grab on everything. They're incredibly strong, so they'll end up clogging pumps and things like that. The plant does have pump clogging issues. The plant staff does have to spend some time doing maintenance on that, but it's not a crazy amount of time. So we did look at the cost of putting a screen in, talk with the plant staff. For us, that's a low priority improvement. And if we did something down the road that really would benefit from putting in screening, maybe that's the time to do it. But from a cost benefit perspective, having the plant do that maintenance periodically is probably counterproductive. Any questions on the headworks area? We can kind of move on.
If you're curious, while Chris goes through, if you just turn to the first page on the graph, the recommended near-term improvements, most of the headworks items 1 through 9 are there. It gives you a good snapshot of the price per agreement for everything that Chris was talking about needing replaced. You'll see the range goes from $1,200 all the way up to about $330,000.
Yeah, so there's, I don't know, 60 or 70 items that are kind of more detailed on the back of this that, are our estimates of what it would cost to have a contractor company to do the work. Pumping systems, this is in the basement of the plant. You know, the entire basement has got 4 major pumping systems and then a lot of major electrical gear that serve those pumps. The pumps, for the most part, are all 1968 vintage, and for the most part, we're not recommending replacement pumps. It's a plant that, in our opinion, does a very good job proactively doing maintenance on these pumps. They have been shipping them out to pump rebuild companies on a periodic basis. They have the pump internals recoated, replacing the seals, you know, repairing colors, things like that. So they've kept the pumps up and running. In addition, there, as Jay has mentioned, and the questions have come up, there's quite a bit of mechanical redundancy in this plant. So if a pump failed, it wouldn't be a catastrophic issue. You know, the consequence of failure isn't that high if a single pump fails. So we're not recommending replacing 50-year-old pumps. That's a lot of cost. It's something that is eventually going to have to happen. But in this 10-year planning cycle, you've got other more important places to spend your money. There's a plant water system, which is in the upper right corner. That's original. It's running very, very often. It's not very efficient. It's got some wear and tear issues. These are 2 smaller pumps. We would recommend replacing that with a more modern plant water system. There'd be some significant energy gains there, and then some reliability improvements that in terms of pump replacements, that's where we put our money. The town has 1 plunger pump that feeds waste sludge up to the belt filter press dewatering system on the 2nd floor of the plant. It was installed in 2007. They've got 2 other pumps that are essentially abandoned, and our recommendation, and with strong buy-in from the plant operating staff, is replace those 2 abandoned pumps with a second redundant plunger pump that would serve those sludge pumping needs. Everything else is relatively minor from a mechanical upgrade. A big cost in the basement is that upper left corner motor control center, or MCC, is also 1968 vintage. That is really old for electrical gear, and it's, you know, there's safety, what we call arc flash type concerns with gear that's old. It's that old, and certainly a major reliability concern. So we're going to put money in the basement. That would be priority 1 for us, would be to replace that electrical gear with something that's newer, safer, more efficient, more reliable.
To point out, the plant water system is kind of the lifeblood of the plant, is where you reuse water from the plant, not using domestic water. It's a way of using plant water and use it for different services all around the plant. You save a lot of money by having one, but you have to maintain it for years.
If you've ever walked through the plant, you notice the piping is labeled processed water. That's the same thing.
But that takes you back over years, compared to domestic water use pretty quickly. They upgrade that.
So, just from a flow path perspective, flow comes into the headworks, goes through the grinder, and then there's these big influent of raw sewage pumps that pump the flow up, and then from there, everything flows by gravity through the plant. This is the grid system, which is located beyond, kind of behind the plant building. This is something that's been maintained over the years, but it's largely original. We didn't touch this area at all in 2006, 2007 timeframe. So this is a part of the plant where grit, which would be sand, larger, heavy debris that would cause wear and tear in downstream equipment, settles out, and then that very abrasive material gets managed as a separate waste stream in the plant. Our recommendations are it's time to put some money into the grid system. It's replacing these chain and flight breath sludge collectors with new sludge collectors. The gates, are heavily corroded, and need to be replaced. And there's some minor concrete repairs, you know, that the concrete itself is in good condition, but it wasn't built in one giant mountain floor, it was called construction joints, when they built it. And those joint sealants have, you know, largely failed, so it's a pathway for corrosion. So there's some, you know, minor repairs there. Rip pump 2 could be rebuilt, that's one that the county do on their own, or it could be built into a capital project. And then there's a number of safety improvements that we recommend in this area. You'll see this in a couple places. In that lower right corner, that's a channel that goes from the grit system into the aeration tanks. And you've got water flowing through that quite rapidly, essentially a river of wastewater flowing through that with, you know, operators that are being forced to mow right up against it with essentially just a 6-inch concrete curb. So there's some fall hazards, you know, in a number of places. This plan do need to get addressed. So not crazy money, but it is something that should be taken care of. Aeration tanks. So this is, you know, Jay's introduction. This is the space where in 2007, the front half of the plant was touched. So those 3 aeration tanks were upgraded. And those are working fine. Those are reliable, good equipment. The back half of the aeration tank was completely abandoned. The front half of the aeration tank has only been used for the last 15 years. The issue is the town hasn't been able to do any maintenance on that. There's, I'm sure, feet of heavy sludgy material packed into the corners. If one of those areas ever fails, you don't really have a good, reliable redundant backup. The north half is operable, but it's mechanical equipment that is rarely operated, 50 years old. I would be hesitant to say you'd be able to rely on it very much for extended period of time. So it is a reliability. There are some safety issues here as well. One of our engineers on the visit with Miles standing against, you know, a 20-foot plus drop with just, you know, knee-high concrete walls. So there's a number of improvements here. So the recommendation for high priority would be upgrade the north half of the tank with new aerators, instrumentation with EFDs to make them efficient, minor concrete repairs, again, like the joint smoke head repairs. There's toe board replacement throughout this, even in these middle tanks where you can see in the upper left, you've got handrails out, toe boards there. Convenient for the operators because they can push snow very easily into the tanks by shoveling, but it also is a safety issue. So we'd rather make the snow shoveling not safe and address those issues as well. Concrete, yeah, I'll just finish these now. It's good to talk. There are concrete bridges that go up to the aeration tanks. You can kind of see that in the upper left picture on the left side. That's a precast concrete bridge that was originally installed. Those have experienced some wear and tear to the point that the town actually, as a major safety issue, noticed that the one in the upper right was failing. So where that piece of conduit is in the upper right, was a bridge, and the town actually came in and removed that so that operators would not walk on it at all. 2 of the bridges are in very bad condition and need to be replaced. 1 needs to be repaired. The other 3 are in fine condition, you know, maybe some coating type things that might. So there's some more critical repairs to be done on those. And then some slight gate replacement on the tail end of the jump on the plant to address as well.
I guess maybe John, to address your question earlier about capacity, we got a huge plant and all that. And we haven't really talked about this, I don't think, in detail, but if you upgraded that half of the aeration system, you could say, well, you need the other half to be operable. Could you just let that go and not have redundancy, but save money? And I think we don't have the answer for you because that's full of water and we can't really see what's going on in the campus. But I would think once Bob gets in there and does an assessment, you may find, you know, you may not have to do a whole lot for that. And you could, right, Chris? You could like not operate. Well, but these minor repairs, keep it as a backup. Just run your newer, rehabilitated part of the plant, save those costs, right? Is this a smart way?
I agree with that.
Right now, you can't take those tanks down and see what's going on. They gotta run these other tanks. And I wouldn't recommend you even start the pump right now, based on what they look like.
Like, they do bump the motors, but if you had to run them under load for months on end, it would be, I mean, they make gearboxes breathe back in the day. It's still a challenge.
You bump them once a year, you wait until the electrical load is at minimal, and then they fire them up one at a time, and he said no more than 5 minutes, he lets them run and shut them right off.
So there's some, definitely, if you go with pieces of the project or whatever you want to do, and see how the rest of the plant is doing, right? But the thing when you raised your question before, if you build a smaller plant now from scratch, you kind of touched on, it's a lot of money, because you're talking new concrete, new excavation, build concrete. I mean, we're seeing really high prices these days, for small plants, right, in New England. They're like unbelievably expensive. And here you've got a huge investment in your tankage, big tanks that will meet your permit pretty well, so you get a plant with something that, you know, a huge cost for the increase. But this tankage and the bones of the plant should last you for a long, long time. So it's a big investment that you're trying to keep going.
From a redundancy perspective, this is a challenging area for us to talk about. I mean, it's a fair amount of money to put in to have that second redundant aeration system, but you really should have it. I mean, to have just a single aeration train, you don't see that very many plants. And, when we look at redundancy, there's some areas where redundancy is very strong, like in the pumps, where you've got 3 pumps and you only ever run 1. That's a very strong area of redundancy. Here you've got 2 trains, you only ever run 1, but if you lost it, you're in a world. So, which is from a redundancy perspective what we're talking about. Clarifiers. This is an area of very high need in our opinion, in the plant staff opinion, and in the regulators' opinion. I think if everybody who looks at this plant identifies the clarifiers here, this is what we need. Back in 2006, 2007, so the clarifiers are 2 big round tanks where wastewater comes in, the sludge in the wastewater settles out, and the clarified water can go to the top and goes through disinfection and out to the river. It's the most important thing at the plant in terms of maintaining that quality effluent. It is the greatest strength of this plant as well. You've got relatively low flows with these massive clarifiers for your flow, so it does allow the plant to maintain a very high quality effluent for a simple plant. It's allowing you to meet a relatively low phosphorus limit as well because you've got large clarifiers. In 2006, 2007, we replaced one of the 2 clarifier mechanisms. And at that time, that was the bad one of the 2. It was the one that was in the other one is just continued to degrade and decay over the last 15 years. It's steel trusses; they're just kind of sagging. It has been band-aided back together. You know, over the last several years, the TEP came out and kind of gave the town a slap on the hand for not having a clarifier that was not proposed to back up. So it was, you know, stitch welded back together. It'll run, but this is one that would be very concerning to run for any length of time. So, of all the things we're doing at the plant, this would probably be the highest priority. We can replace that mechanism, second clarifier. There's some other minor things here, and then some medium priorities. The operators spend a fair amount of time brushing algae out of the launders. Algae is really bad for permit compliance. It goes downstream and causes some issues. So you can put what are called launder covers, which are basically like plastic covers over the windows that prevent the sun from getting in there and prevent the algae from growing. So that's something that, is, you know, the medium cost that could have some benefit down the road. chemical area. I didn't show the chlorine contact chamber because in 2006, 2007, we did spend some money over in that area, and that's held up fine. There's really not any significant need to spend money in the chlorine contact chamber these days. The chemical treat area was also upgraded in 2006, 2007, but it is showing some signs of pretty significant corrosion. It is also an area where things just don't last as long, so just kind of step through what you're looking at in this picture. In the upper right corner are two sodium hypochlorite tanks. Sodium hypochlorite is just household bleach, it's just a much stronger concentration here. That's used for chlorine disinfection of your wastewater. Those tanks are, really past their useful life expectancy. We see tanks like this tend to last 10 years before the plastic in the tanks in that chlorine service starts to get a little bit brittle because the tank cracking. They're still working, but they're kind of up for time. In the upper left corner are two what's called a tote, it's a portable tank, sodium bisulfite. That works fine, there's certainly some corrosion in that area. The town staff would rather manage that chemical with a bulk delivery from a tank and just pump it into a permanent tank rather than moving around these portable totes. So that would be an improvement with some small sodium bisulfite tanks in. It would have some piping, concrete curving, things like that. So not a major upgrade, but it would be an improvement in that area. Yeah, sodium bisulfite is added to the tail end of the plant, so chlorine is added to the beginning of the chlorine contact chamber, contacts the harmful bacteria in the chlorine contact chamber as a disinfecting agent. You have a permit that doesn't allow you to discharge chlorine to the river, so that sodium bisulfite quenches the chlorine before it goes through the river. You need both chemicals in your permit. HVAC improvements are recommended here, as well as some door improvements, just to get some better ventilation in here and buy some longer life. We didn't touch HVAC in any significant level back in 2006, 2007. It's the case, it's considerably over the years. And then one safety improvement here is a code change since we did this upgrade. There's an emergency shower in there that has just cold water in it, so if somebody had chemical on them, they would pull the shower and they would be dosed with water versus chemical. A more recent code change, that water is supposed to be what's called peppered, so rather than dumping cold water, it's got to be between 60 degrees Fahrenheit, so that's a small on that water. Admin building is, well, if you like 1968 architecture, is great. I mean, it's well built, it's reliable, from a structural perspective, there's not major issues. The roofs, are, other than the high roof, we replaced the high roof in 2006, 2007, the roofs probably could be addressed over time. Whether they get built into a major capital upgrade or something the town does as smaller projects, or you just manage as a repair type project, are all possibilities.
Actually, sort of pricing going to the contractor directly instead of looking into the big project like this.
Yeah, agree with that. So what we're talking with this building, there's doors and windows that are older, probably not the most efficient, but as we're looking at the next 10 years and where you spend limited resources, we didn't see replacing doors and windows as a hot topic here. But the spaces are, they're really comfortable and serve their purpose for the town staff. HVACs are an issue though. The HVAC system has, fallen into its disrepair due to its age. So, a number of thermostats don't work. We've got some areas where heat is just either on, full blast, or off. So there's some uncomfortable areas in that plant. So spending some is appropriate. There's some other water control centers in the plant that are 1950 that should be replaced. And then there was talk about doing a small lab renovation, just got that much in there that seems to be. That's really, really just spot limited repairs. Yeah. Town has two significant pumping complexes. The Harmony Street pump station, the top two, photographs. You know, smaller pump station, small generator, in more industrial area of town. It's reliable, the town staff is done small upgrades over the years, has other small upgrades planned. You know, they've done electrical upgrades, they've done pump upgrades, they've done more plans. From our perspective, continue to force, you know, the town's doing a fine job maintaining that pump station. We don't have any recommendations for high priority needs for that pump station. The domestic and industrial pump stations are, two pump station buildings that are side by side. They're out behind, on the chemical area, out in that kind of industrial area, that are, in more critical need of repairs. Again, the town does a good job of maintaining the pumps. Our issues here are more primarily on the electrical side. This is a pretty unique situation because of the lack of industry in Adams, that you've got an industrial pump station that serves industries that are no longer in service, or essentially an unused pump station. And then you've got a domestic pump station that sort of serves domestic wastewater. They kind of work as a complex right now with the generator that serves both of those stations in the industrial pump station. So that generator is, it's seen today, it's 50 years old, it definitely needs to be replaced with a new emergency generator. And then border control centers in the domestic pump station are aging and inefficient, unsafe, those kinds of concerns. So that's where we'll be putting our money into the pump station. The mechanics, the pipe, those kinds of things are in fair condition. The town, it's up to a decent job maintaining those pumps as well. So that's who we would recommend putting money in that area. That are a series of tables that I've got attached. I'll just kind of guide you through the table without going through every line. And feel free to look at the leisure. We break this into trying bite-sized chunks where we're seeing the work, looking at material costs, installation costs for a quote that, there's a contractor overhead profit component, that gets built into the overall project if they're rolled into a bigger project. And then as town staff request, so you've got what totals here to be something over $4 million. Not every one of those improvements are equal in need. So they have to take a look at that from a priority perspective. So we looked at each item on this with a condition score of 1 to 5, and a higher score is worse, the lower score is better. So a 5 would be a high priority, really poor condition. And then a criticality score of 1 to 3. And critical for us would be, consequence of failure, would be very bad for the town, very major safety issues would be high critical type of needs. And on the other side, if there's a low consequence of failure or the safety issue that might be major, it will be a lower criticality. So you get a score here that ranges from 1 to 15. These are all the high priority improvements, so they tend to be on the higher side just naturally because we self-selected them all the high priority ones. But not everything is in the same overall priority. There is some economies dealing with an overall project that you might be doing 3 things in one area that are higher priority. You might want to lump in a medium priority and wait just to get it all done in one area. So, those are some decisions that will have to be made as the town thinks about, a capital upgrade that would be done this way.
The other benefit of doing a condition, criticality, and the overall score, those 3 columns, that's essentially what an asset management plan criteria does for you. As we talk about that, we want to talk about that later, but that if you do a restructure and asset management grant from the state, their plan follows EPA guidelines, including the clinical guide, and it has the same kind of scoring. So what's good is a couple things. It leaves you a legacy score for future plant operators to say, oh yeah, remember we consider that a critical piece of equipment. But right now it's in good condition. Remember, 10 years from now, you may want to revisit whether it's a good condition, but it's still probably a critical piece of equipment you want to replace. So as conditions deteriorate over time, typically, is something critical or not, typically it remains critical. And through all your assets, you have stormwater, for roads, for sewers, it allows you a way of looking at whether all your assets across the town are truly critical, and make sure they're getting rated conditions every so often. Right? So it's the backbone of an asset management plan. We'll do that later. This table though pretty much follows the sequence of the first grid, right?
It does end up follow the order that we went through, so, we can organize it other ways, that's how we set up. You know, so if you scroll to the last page of this, it does have a total at the bottom, which people are seeing it, they're flipping through, and it's $4 million change of what we've identified as in the high priority category. There's some things the town is already doing, and the town is continuing to do maintenance activities. So we pulled some of those out that we're aware the town is doing. The challenge with any of these projects is some of these things that might get, you know, especially moved into a capital plan, are probably going to fail between now and then. So there's some things that you just got to recognize it's going to be continued maintenance. I guess the last thing I would say is, you know, if you talk about a project in the order of $4 million or, you know, whatever it is, the work we have septic to there, it's only a small component of the overall asset the town has. You've got a plant that was constructed today, even downsized with the $50 million plant or something like that. You know, so you've got a huge amount of cost invested. You know, the way it's constructed with a larger scale, it could be an $80 million plant or more. So there's a lot of cost that the town has invested previously. This only scratches the surface in terms of, you know, the total value of the asset.
So, Jay, Robert, anything you wanted to add?
So that gives you a snapshot as to the nuts and bolts of the equipment and the overall condition of the plant. So the next part, that I'm gonna ask the guys to go into for us, essentially, so how will we pay for it? We have a good snapshot of what we need to do. We kind of have a good snapshot of what we need to do first versus a little bit later down the road. But how do we pay for it? The other item is the asset management planning grant also requires us to put some money up front. So there is a cost even to that, but that cost might leverage us to be able to get the funding for the plant. As I've talked about before, we thought it was a good time that we had to do this anyway because the infrastructure money might become available through a federal allocation or through state. However, what we're hearing with time bond appearing that if that money were to become available, it would not likely be in grant format. It would be already funneled through pre-existing funding mechanisms, which is a state revolving fund for wastewater. So no matter really at this point what we do as a plant, we're going to have to carry debt. So we want to be smart in how we do it. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Ty and Bond so that Kristen Milan can walk us through what that process would look like. As I said before, keep in mind that first bond expires 2025, $175,000 plus $10,000 on interest. It's quite possible that if we go out to bond again, you could take that money and refinance the entire amount. But that's yet to be determined for sure. So that's where we are at this point.
Excuse me, before we go to the next topic, and I ask some questions regarding the, okay, yes, some, you know, perhaps some quick answers to some of these things. Now, you're saying that there are what you call safety concerns at the plant or railings. Now, when DEP visits, have they ever brought that up? Or should go down there?
Yeah. So DEP does go. I don't know what DEP has commented to the town operations staff, safety issues. So, I don't know, DEP sometimes make comments on safety, sometimes, they focus just on environmental, so I don't know what they're expecting from comments. OSHA is an interesting question. OSHA, municipalities used to be, technically exempt from OSHA, and kind of use OSHA as guidelines, but that's changed. And so OSHA now is a governing requirement for municipalities. So I don't believe that OSHA is proactively coming to municipal facilities like this and doing inspections. But if something did happen,
Right.
they surely would come, and that would come out of it for sure.
Yeah. Okay, another thing, I went there today. I've been through the plant, many times, but not for, quite a while. So, while Gary gave me a tour of it, everything kind of came back. One thing that, I was concerned in Walt is in your basement, he had just repainted one of the pumps silver, and already there's black mold on it. Throughout that whole bottom, there's black mold on the walls, there's black mold starting on the equipment down there,
Yeah.
and that's dangerous.
Yep, okay. I didn't see that. That's a good comment. Yep, that would be something where you would want to look at, where's the moisture coming from?
Yep.
How much of that is it leaking, or is it in the basement, so it's inherently damp?
Yeah.
Dehumidification systems, things like that would be the types of controls that we'd be looking at, for sure.
I mean,
But on the lower pump area?
and the walls too, some of the walls. Yeah.
In the room where you just hand the floor?
At the very bottom where you go down a spiral,
Okay.
Oh, that's in the lowest
lowest area.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some of the walls are showing up black mold on it.
Okay.
Well, I don't know the terminology for all this stuff, the grid collector. One of the motors, he started them up, and one of them's, it's going, it sounds like it's a bearing or something. Motor number 2, I think he said, and he started up the other one, and they had a nice hum to it, whereby motor number 2, it was functioning, but it sounded like bearings or something were kind of, awry.
Yeah.
And, that he really thought was a priority to, look into doing something there. It's very antiquated. Matter of fact, at the gate where they have the gate at the end,
Yes.
they wanted to put stainless steel in, and they didn't because we couldn't afford it at the time when Joe Fijo was running it. Now, for something that you can't afford to put that in, and now it's rusted at the bottom again, but that just shows you, that's how close to the cup that,
Yep.
money-wise, that this town has to deal with. Couldn't put stainless steel in because it would have cost probably thousands more, of course. We go with something else, but then redundancy, within a short time, we're back to where we were. And that is the big situation in this community, is money, like it is everywhere else. And these asset grants, you need a grant writer, for sure, is that something you do for a fee?
Yeah, so, we're gonna talk about 2 funding opportunities tonight. Miles will talk about the asset management grant, and that's for us, that's a small fee rated grant, which is already built into our contract with the town. It is a pretty significant grant in terms of money that can come to the town to help identify these needs, and, some contribution from the town in terms of actual dollars, go through that. That's out there, and writing an SRF application is another, we do this with communities all the time. It's a very simple thing to do.
Yeah, because infrastructure is the Achilles heel of all communities. It's always deferred maintenance because, can't afford it. And then as time moves along, prices escalate. And that's certainly the case here. A few other things that I noticed, where the water enters into the Hoosic River, the 2 channels, the dividing wall has leaks through it. There's leaks, 2 leaks.
Okay.
And it's just a matter of time before that corrodes the cement even more. And there was an algae bloom at the bottom, which shouldn't happen when it enters there, and, Walt said that that's unusual, but they had to do something with the chlorine, they were spraying down for a while, so some algae got down into the Hoosick River before the inflow, which DEP probably wouldn't like to see that, you know?
Your was usually pretty good.
Yeah.
Things like that do happen.
Right. And then, also, I'm kind of losing my thoughts, but now, would solar array there do anything to immeasurably cut electric costs? Because it's a high electrical use facility.
Yeah, we talked about that, other meetings, that's planned, we talked about that, right, Robert? And it would probably dedicate, you probably have to go back out to the grid. You probably want the power to go back to the grid, and then, you get credit for that.
Right.
To offset your credit for the demand from the grid back to your plant.
Right.
My experience is, and you say and Robert, you probably have, you all probably have good experience right here too, depending on the deal you can get with the developer or the solar provider, and in terms of that, if you do that analysis, we can probably build that in for a rate study. Yep. What we're doing, we're looking at cash flow. See if you can add a motor like that you work with, and, the kind of, kilowatts you can produce and what kind of return you can get for your credit back to the grid. You can build that in, but places are going with that. Other towns are doing that from Massachusetts. Yep. And as you know, I think some cities are doing that as well. Massachusetts, DOT in particular, building a lot of great solar grids.
So our solar farm on East Road generates credits for us. We apply a good portion of those credits towards the electrical load at wastewater. And we just renegotiated the electrical, bills. I believe there's 3 or 4 accounts at the plant for, I want to say, a 3-year outlook at a lower rate than what we're paying now starting next year. So we've got it, and we just did a, internal lighting program over there too. So Joe's correct in that it's a very heavy, electrical heavy operation. We paid, the town has paid attention to it, in the past.
And, the north tanks that aren't being used now, one, down to the concrete, and there's a lot of cracks at the bottom of the concrete, and
There's a lot of concrete repair work needed.
Right.
It would be a combination in those aeration tanks in particular of, joint seal repair and then some actual crack injection.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then also, one of the tanks, they had, as you had mentioned, take the bridge off and bring it over to the other one, and now there's no way to even get over to, one of the tanks, you know? So if there was ever an emergency, then there could be some trouble because we have to use the pipes. And then, one of the gates that lead to open up is broken. And, they had to open it and have a machine come in and lift it up because, it just won't turn up. It's things like that that don't make a difference until you really need them, So, there's a lot that really needs to be done there, but, and I'll stop here. There was other questions, but I don't want to take up much more time, but it's all predicated on money. And, the government at the federal level and even the state have talked about infrastructure. We're going to get a bill together for infrastructure. And should things turn, if, I don't know how to say it, I don't like to get political, but if the Senate turns Democrat and the House stays the same, we got So, I'll just, stop there, and I'd like to hear what you have to say, with your presentation on the cost.
Yeah, that's a good segue. Back when this plant was built, back in the day, there was all kinds of grant money out there at the federal level to do projects like this. The grant money, not entirely gone, but it's mostly gone. So, what we're talking about today is, state revolving fund loan, which is a low interest loan. That's what funded the 2006, 2007 upgrade. It would be a 2% loan likely for Adams, given the types of work that you're doing. The potential carrot out there, just following up on what we're talking about, is the federal stimulus. Like if the federal stimulus does come in past economic downturns, that's been funneled through these types of programs. Expectation, when you hear folks talk about what could be an infrastructure package, they always spend money on transportation. Like 80% of the money, 70% of the money that goes towards transportation projects. But water and wastewater do get funding, and it can be significant. So that would tend to go through a loan program like this. It would be funneled to the town as like a grant, as a loan forgiveness. So it wouldn't be 100% loan forgiveness, but there would be some loan forgiveness that ultimately would be attractive. The thought process is apply for the SRF loan in this next cycle and position yourself to be ready to receive that kind of funding if it did come down the pipe. SRF funding is really geared towards like projects with environmental benefit. What's attractive about this project in a lot of ways is it would probably have a whole bunch of little things that would allow us to write a loan application that would check a whole bunch of little boxes. So you would score reasonably well. You're not doing this major nutrient upgrade project or something like that that's going to get the top score. You're not preventing combined sewer overflows from being discharged to a river, which always scores very high. So you're going to be a reasonably attractive project. So it's a question of how much competition is out there, but tend to expect that this kind of project will score reasonably well, and it would likely get funded. The schedule for this, I just handed out. We can kind of step through this. This is a pretty prescriptive schedule at the end of the day. The application is due August 21st. So that's something that the town would need to move on. Essentially, you've got to make a decision pretty quickly to move forward on that. The next big milestone is getting on the intended use plan. I'm going to skip a couple steps here. We would find out sometime in early 21 whether or not you're on the intended use plan. That means you have been approved for funding. And then the next step would be by August 15th, 2021. I'm sorry, October 15th, 2021, you would need to submit your formal loan application, includes essentially a 90+% design with an estimated cost of the project, and then your other financial backup. So that's when you really need to be shovel ready for a project. It takes a couple months to review that information, and so then you're talking about actually going into construction sometime in early 2022 with a project like this.
Hey, Fred, can you just go over what we have to do in order to fund that on the budgetary side? Would that money have to go into the fiscal 22 budget? Because there's a percent matching, correct, for that?
This is a loan, so this is something that the town would need to vote appropriation for this. This is a matching program where you're getting, like, 2020 match, like, I was going to talk about that. This is an actual loan to vote appropriation on, and then, the mechanisms, I'm not going to talk about the mechanisms of what has to happen with the money around. This is typically a reimbursement type project where you would get a contract with the application and submit it to the state. They would review it, approve it, and say, once you get and then you've got that loan for the 20-year cycle.
Your fiscal year appropriations would have to align with the schedule outlined here.
The project is probably big enough where it would span a couple of fiscal years. It's not going to be done in a single year construction. applying for the loan now doesn't necessarily force you to proceed with the project. You get on the intended use plan, DEP gets frustrated if the community drops off the intended use plan year over year over year, but, you know, as apply the loan very often and, you know, you have to defer it for some reason, you know, you're not mandated to proceed with the project. So, you know, they like you to act in good faith, but, we want to know second to proceed with the project.
Can we apply without the appropriation in place?
Yes, you need to have the appropriation, before you can proceed with the next step, which is October 15th, 2021. Okay. No. October, yeah. So that would typically happen, like mid next year, or June of next year.
Yeah, you apply now, though, at the beginning of the cycle, you meet this cycle, you apply now. Otherwise, everything goes back a year.
Okay.
Right? Same with the grant application for the asset management. Apply now, but you don't have to appropriate the funds until a year, well, a little bit over a year plus from now. So your fiscal year 22, for the grant application for the asset management, you have to have a town vote to fund it. And the asset management grant is, we haven't filled out the, Robert and I need to work on the paperwork, and see what size grant we'd be looking for, but that might be a $50,000 total effort, and you might get 50, you do it, if it is, you get 50% of that back. That way you've got all your assets looked at, and you have a roadmap for future work. And the SRF, folks, the same people that administer the SRF program, that administer the grant program for them. So they become more aware of your priorities, right? The more they're there more to support you. When you go to that effort.
Excuse me, go ahead, Jay.
No,
This is state?
right.
Yeah.
This is federal money that's administered by the state. So it's
Administered
federal
by
money
the
that comes to the state.
Okay, yeah.
And the state administers the program decides to do it.
Okay, yeah.
It's through the, what's called the Clean Water Trust, is how that's administered, but it's really managed by the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection.
And all indicators are, the congressmen are all saying it's probably gonna fall the last round, capital session, which is the same funnel. The Fed appropriates the funds, the way they're gonna distribute it will be through the SRF. Okay, no indication it's gonna be different, a different mechanism, because it's already established. They got Mike McGrath, the administrator for Western Massachusetts, you know the drill, he's the guy we talked to, application.
In past infrastructure bills, what the feds are really looking for, what they call shovel-ready projects. They want people going to work, getting jobs right away in the construction industry. So that's really what we're trying to drive towards.
So this has been an established loan program for several years.
Yes. The SRF program is decades, very well.
Decades, and has the amount of funding provided by the federal government and the state government distributed, has that gone, have you seen a trend of it being less over time? Most other grants that come from the federal government?
Yeah, it depends, the interest rate is attractive, and most, a lot of our clients are going for it because the interest rates are attractive, and then it's like Pittsfield, just happened in Pittsfield, if you can, take further steps to show the DEP that you have, a good plan to dedicate funds to your needs. You have to go through quite a few more hoops to get a 0%, reduce it from 2% to 0%. So on a $4 million project, you're talking about a 2%, fee on that is over 20 years. It's quite a bit of money, but you probably have to go through that kind of effort, that kind of money, appropriations, just to get them all the reports and documents that they would need considered for you to get a reduced loan. We can do the math for you in the next few weeks if you're interested. We do that a lot in the community. Where that extra effort could actually take a couple of years of studying. We weigh that in the balance for you. Get
that's not a slam dunk for Adam. It's 2% is the standard SRF loan. To get to 0%, there's something called the O'Leary bill, which was the bill written for Cape Cod communities. Smart Congressman or other stuff, we're gonna give money to Cape Cod, that was his district. DEP said you can't do that, so they crafted language to allow it to go anywhere in the state. It's for projects that are doing nutrient removal, which is nitrogen and phosphorus removal. Have what's called a comprehensive wastewater management plan, that's the plan that Miles was talking about. That's a significant wastewater management plan. That's not a $1,000 study that we did here. That can be, up to hundreds of thousands of dollars to really do long-range planning for a community. And then you have to do what's called land use controls, which is not a big deal, but it does impact your sewer use regulations a little bit. The biggest piece, two biggest pieces for you would be, are what you're doing here suitable to meet that nutrient removal need? We do have a new phosphorus program, so we might be able to check that box, but it's not 100% planned out. These kind of like equipment upgrades are going to be something that they're going to do with the project. And then you don't.
The clarifier upgrades, could they added the, notice the, density samples you mentioned in the write-up? They enhance your performance clarifier, and you could get rid of more material that could need the phosphorus discharge. So you could argue, we could make an argument for you that perhaps could fall in that category. Get your higher rating for your interest rate.
So one of the questions that we're gonna probably ask, that's why I asked this question, is, we're making a payment on the previous upgrade that ends in 5 years. Is there, maybe going down that path and investing in trying to get that down to 0, but, is there a way to, go through this process where by the time we're ready to start, it's pretty close to 5 years when we have the other one paid off, and it becomes pretty much a lot easier for us to just get another bond or the loan, whatever it may be. But the question now becomes, we've been talking about these alternatives, but what about the plant itself? We've been upgrading, rebuilding pumps, and we've been making it work. Investing that money every year to make it continue. What are your thoughts if we took the 5-year total plan, but we would start the paperwork process, try to get a 0% loan, try to get, how much it costs to develop the plan, and then just run into, which would be a lot easier for us, just run into paying another payment. It will be higher than the current one, but we're already paying now. Yeah. So, what are your thoughts about the plant continuing to operate? We continue to use capital funds to fix the issues, and then at 5 years, I think we'll be in a much better place, or 4 years, and we're starting, at least we can, maybe a year earlier into getting it upgraded. I think it has to happen, Yeah. But I'm just trying to buy some time for that 5 years to come.
It is 5 years, like from now, roughly, to the end
So,
of the current.
After we met, and we said that this was gonna have to be some type of debt, that was my concern, because we had thought that the original debt would expire with only a year or two by the time we hit those marks. When I talked to Mary, it was MW, which was Massachusetts Water, it was MW PAC, that was the original.
That's the trust, yes, Massachusetts Water, that's the trust.
So Mary thought that if we went out again, we could take that existing debt that we had and roll it in to a new borrower. And we would explore what that cost would be, rather than waiting the entire period, because it's the same lender. That was her approach. It just needs to be explored.
Most communities do that, because they can't wait, like you, they can't wait to pay it off before they need to do something.
Yeah.
The other day, they usually roll it off because the interest rates are lower now.
Because I know where John's going.
Yeah.
He and I have the same concern. Anything, we just borrowed $2.5 million to take care of it. Again, to Joe's point, infrastructure has been ignored. We had a terrible storm, blew out a whole bunch of culverts. We had no choice but to borrow for 2.5 in order to take care of that. We don't have a lot of debt. We're actually really, really good. But I'm very conservative, and I'm concerned about taking on more debt, despite the fact that we know we have to do this. If we go to that enterprise sewer user fee system, it doesn't impact the tax rate, because I believe we can use the enterprise fund to pay the debt. We can use the user fee to pay the plant staff. We can use it for operations. We can use it for capital. We can use it for sewer collection system repair. We even use it for a little bit of different salaries, anyone that touches the plant. So it's actually an opportunity for us to take that debt on, but not put it on the tax rate.
I think it's a good thing to reduce the tax rate number.
Yes.
But to pay off some of that debt, I don't know if we're on the same page, you know, the sewer fee, people are gonna see the sewer fee go up, taxes may, you know, go down, right? What's, you know, is it gonna come out the same? Or now the user fee is gonna hammer us, higher price, and we're gonna end up paying more anyway, so we gotta get our story.
We can do that now.
And that's why through an establishment, if you remember from our workshop, there's two methods of the sewer user fee. One would require tying with the water district, because it's based on cubic foot of water that's used. The other method is just a flat rate, which is usually, I think, based on property value, something to that effect. Like, for example, our contract we have with Mark Adams, for when they send us the effluent, it's all based on property assessed value, not flow. So we have to look, that's what I want Ty and Bond to do, is I want them to look at what the best structure is, what works for a similarly situated community such as ourselves, so we can answer those questions. Because we know we're gonna have to explain to the public why are we doing this and what the advantages are. We know it's gonna drop the tax rate by 2 something, but they will have an additional payment on top of that. If you're on septic, you win. You win. But if you're on sewer, town sewer, there is gonna be a cost. So that's why it's hard to kind of separate it all. The way I look at it is we have to look at it all, because we need the capital. How do we pay for the capital? The user fee is the mechanism for that. Why are we doing it? Lower tax rate, but we have to take on debt. This is what I think about at 3 o'clock in the morning.
So potentially, the remaining loan you have, the town, is going for 5 more years. You could roll that, you're thinking, one option we should look at is rolling that into, right, a loan for the sewer district. And then we look at capital improvements such as these, and we talked to Robert and others who say, what else, you know, are going to be coming at you to establish that user base and projections for what the user fees could be for the next 5 to 10 years. We'll show you some curves and all we do to make projections.
And I think the other factor too is exactly how much do we want to borrow for? Because some of these projects I find aren't that expensive. We might be able, to John's point, fund some of them off our capital programs that we have, as we've done in the past. So really, at the other end of the day, is what needs to be done and what needs to be done. What's the best mechanism to do that? Is it, you know, what's the best work to do off the borrow? Because there's some items that I thought were incredibly cost attractive to do off the capital program, and Robert's done some research himself and has found even lower costs on some of the items too.
That's right. And if you were going on the loan for the town or for sewer, user base now, what kind of rates do you think that they'll, you know, give you that much money?
Yeah. Right now, we're paying 2% on the original borrow.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that.
Yeah. Interest is $10,770 annual. For capital on that is $175. Principal is $175,620 annual.
The challenge the board's gonna have is when you establish an enterprise fund, you're gonna set a tax rate, you're gonna set a sewer rate, and then, right, that, you gotta make sewer rate increases periodically. So having, you know, a good solid plan that has defined payments, when one's gonna send funds out, when one's gonna come on, capital upgrades, so you can't do everything in 1 year, going forward. So you're gonna budget these out over years, and at least you can have a conversation about if we don't raise rates, I mean, these things are should get done, can't happen. So it does lead to, there's real consequences and real costs as well. To your original question, I mean, the plan's been in place for 52 years, in the last 53, yeah, it's not like it's gonna blow up, stick into the ground tomorrow. What's unique about this time right now, though, is that, in my mind, that infrastructure, federal infrastructure, I mean, that does come, kind of get one shot at the apple with that. So if that's there and it's attractive, you might not want to miss it. So,
Large part of that might be a grant.
right, right. And we need to have a plan, we've got a plan started here for the, the last thing is, when they built this plan, yes, it probably last maybe 50 years. But, you know, it was built, I think concrete was probably cheap. I don't know. Just take the admin building, for example. You know, it's a big area, it's, you know, it's got the labs, it's got a lot going on there too. But does the community look at, you know, hey, we can build a, you know, not a Taj Mahal type thing, but you build a new admin building right on the side of this. You run, you know, you run your controls, you modernize computer controls, which will save you money.
That would be part of our.
Right, which you plan on, right, remember that, you're gonna do that anyway. And you run the wiring back into the bigger part building, we shut down half the building, you know, and you know, you have a brand new windows, brand new roof, gonna last for 30 or 50 years. We just made a good investment as a community. You know, so that's what I'm saying, you keep the clarifiers, you gotta replace that bridge. I understand, you can't replace those, it's gonna cost you way too much. But just an admin building, those kind of thoughts are running through my mind, because it's so old, and we're gonna, in this board and future boards are gonna be continuously paying to upgrade. I see all the words in there, upgrade, repair, you know, things like that. A lot of that's going on.
This is a heavy maintenance project.
Heavy maintenance. Right, and as Joe was saying, we've gone through that with schools and things like that, and in the end, it's close to school, you know, it's not worth it anymore, but this has been built very good, and they last 50 years, no problem. But we can find ways, something like that, an admin building, a much smaller building, have a lab in there, which is, you know, brand new, and it's got all this new equipment and everything, and it's just a good investment for this community in the future, instead of, you know, staying with what we got. I don't know if it can be done, it's just ideas I throw out there to think about, you know, just try to, you know, I know we need to make, maintenance upgrades, we have to do that. I see that coming, hope that we can wait for 5 years, before we break ground. But are there ways that we can modernize that building a bit? Because we are now down to 2,300, we may have to do more because when things like COVID happened, they went up to 3,000 or 3,500. But can we just reduce the blueprint a little bit and have some more, and invest in the modern features, an admin building, and try to bring it into it as much as you can, and then have all the, you know, still have a lot of what you have there now, but I don't know if it's possible or not. Just want to, you know, give the people veterans an opportunity. You can invest, or we can do maintenance like we did at the middle school, we could do it at the public school, it's just on and on and on. Thank you, I appreciate all the information.
Other questions?
Yeah, just one more comment. Enterprise funding is kind of the way a lot of communities are going now, because all that money is dedicated toward, a lot of, before that, you took a little money out, you know, from this, but I know our Prudential, committee has, began 2 years ago with, enterprise, and they're seeing a little profit, not much, but a little profit from, you know, so you gotta start somewhere, so I think that's good because it's dedicated money to the cause that you're, yeah. And my last thing is, to John's point, that's a good idea, but everything is so goddamn expensive, so, you know, to change over everything and, you know, it's just, it's a money pit, regardless of what you do. I mean, chemicals are expensive as can be, they're only gonna go up. And, you know, there's definitely a lot of chemicals being used there. So, you know, I don't think you can really win financially on this. The only thing you can do is try to cut your losses by, you know, approaching it the best way that you can, because it's still gonna cost a lot of money. Now, you're going to do this, is this an add-on fund that we have to pay you for next step if you start doing, you know, the, study and things? So, well, does that go in with this batch here, or is that gonna be separate, more funding toward you?
Yeah. Really, we're just in the study phase, so if this did go forward into an actual project, you know, we have to figure out specifically which elements of what we talked about today would be in that design, and then we have to get that design active. So that would be the next more step.
So it'd be an add-on that doesn't go along with this. This study is complete and it, I don't know if it's paid for, but that's it, okay. So we hired you for this and you gave us a product.
The rate study, which we're gonna do as part of the project, and the asset management grant. So I'm requesting the SRF loan grant, I think we can do that as part of that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the asset management grant, their work on that grant is included in the $50,000 that this contract is, and it's funded under the community compact grant that we also run. So this is essentially costing the town nothing at this time. So there's three tabs that Steinbach has. Number one is the CIP overview, which is what we got tonight. That gives us the snapshot. Now we need to determine, do we want to take it further? Taking it further will be applying for the SRF loan, and that's writing consensus from the board to say, do we want to go ahead doing that? Under knowing that if we get it, we're going to have to go to town meeting and get the debt authorization. But that also gives us, that's fiscal 22, thank God, not fiscal 21, and it gives us time to research the numbers, see what the impact is, and we have the escape clause to say, no, it doesn't work for us. My opinion would be to do that, because I don't know how else to fund it. And it seems like it's no risk, you know, at this point. The other task for them, in addition to understanding the user fee, is the asset management grant, whereas they will put that in for us, and if we get it, that will give us a better leg up on the SRF, potentially even getting a lower interest rate. So that's kind of where I need the guidance from the board to say, do we want to go ahead with those steps next, so we can put time on the work. We're still under that 50 grand at this time, or not.
Yeah,
So before we go forward, Jim has been patiently, waiting and waving his arms wildly. Other members have pointed it out to me. So Jim, I want to make sure you have a chance to ask a question, because you've been pretty quiet.
Yeah, my question is, this is going to extend out over 4 years, almost 5 years. And we all know that things are not going to stay the same price from year to year. Are we prepared for price increases over the 5 years, or is this going to be written in somehow, or?
Yeah, that's a great question, and yeah, unfortunately, prices do go up. So the next step for us is, if we're doing an SRF application, to determine the actual project that's going to be incorporated there, and then bundle that into our full opinion of probable construction costs. That would typically include an estimation. It would think about how quickly the project's going to be implemented. So the numbers we've got here are just in today's dollars. So you know, it's typically like a 2% per year, and we would typically go to like the midpoint of construction as where we escalate to. Does that make sense? So it does escalate out several years.
The other part of my question is, we know we're going to do this work in a 4-year period. Is it possible to put a bid out for a 4-year period and take out a loan and pay on it as they're doing the repairs?
Yeah, sort of. But if you're going to do one contract, contractors make money by going as fast as they can and getting the job done. you could write a contract where you force them to go in pieces. I don't know what SRF will say about that, because they do want you to make progress. Contractors would charge you more money if you slow them down, because they would also recognize the increase in cost, increase in labor, they've got bond insurance, things like that, so there would be a cost to them that they would have to pass on to you. So it's possible, but, probably better for the town to pick a project and then let the contractor execute that in an efficient way once they start construction.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks, Jim, appreciate your patience.
this is my last question for the
Sure.
last time. Now, if
Your last question.
Yeah, my last question. Now, if this is a grant administered by the state, does it have to be the work done by union people?
No.
No, okay.
It's a loan, it's not a grant. It does not need to be union executed. So there's contractors that are union shops, there's contractors that are non-union shops. What they all need to do is, pay the Massachusetts state minimum wage rate for that trade. Prevailing wage rate, not minimum, prevailing wage rate for that trade. And because it's a, federally administered loan, they also have to pay the federal, Davis Bacon wage rate for that trade. Typically, Massachusetts pays higher than the federal wage rate, so typically Massachusetts becomes.
Is it specialized people that do this kind of work, or can, regular electrician come in and do some of it? How fragmented would the workforce have to be for the different components of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's, because it's a public building project, it falls under what's called Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 149, which is for public buildings. That, there's something, Division of Capital Asset Management kind of governs that program. The contractors that are doing the work need to be certified by, DCAM, which is Capital Asset Management. So they've got to be certified. So typically, the general contractor would be certified for water and wastewater work, and then the other, subcontractors, have to be certified in their trade. So the electrician couldn't just be a household electrician. If they could get certified in the DCAM, they could do the work, they would have to be certified, and that usually takes some money. So you don't get, you tend to get contractors that are doing the type of work that are able to do it. Okay, there's some local contractors could roll up to a general contractor if they don't fall under one of the major trades. So, carpenters don't fall into that, so they can come in and do work.
Okay, well, thank you. You've been very informative.
I think what we end up doing, Joe, is if we decide to, depending upon where we are in that loan process, we would introduce another contractor type on to go into design services and then engineering management services, and they would essentially run the project. Take care of the bidding, take care of all that stuff.
Massachusetts has a lot of bureaucracy, but we're pretty good with service.
And I saw their work at Pittsfield plant, very impressive.
I just say, John, maybe to your point, the asset you have there at the plant, I kind of said it before, but it's just a huge asset. And your staff there has done a great job as they can. I mean, I know there's some holes in that lower area you were saying, but they, I imagine they're going to take immediate action, something like that. And that's what's keeping it running and protecting your assets so long. Several places we go to, you often don't see that much. Right? And things are deteriorating a lot faster than what they are here.
Well, thank you.
That's all it is.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments from the board? Jim, anything?
No, there isn't.
Okay, thank you. I thought maybe you were frozen, sorry. Go ahead,
You
Joe.
don't look frozen to me. Comfy again.
My AC's working better than Jay's.
Yeah, so, just a, synopsis and recap. how are we gonna approach this? Put a timetable, because August isn't too far away to.
So as Jay mentioned, he's looking for consensus from the board, to move forward with the sorry, which are all of those letters, before with that funding application. Is that correct? That's what you're looking for, probably this evening is the first step from the board. Is consensus enough, or do you need an official vote?
I don't,
You
I just need a head nod, I don't need anything. Yeah.
I think we just need consensus to go, because what their work would be is then they would work with Robert and Bob and the plant staff to determine what work do we want done that would be covered by the SRS, and that would have a cost attached to it. And then I would envision coming back to the board with, time on, and say, here's some of our options. We don't have to do all of the work. That's kind of the positivity that came out of having time on look at the plant, is in addition to Walt and the guys and how they're maintaining it. We don't have to take a big bite. The town's been putting money, has been totally ignored. But for me, I need to know where really the priority is. Is it those safety? Is it the HVAC? And what investment do we make that's gonna give us that, putting a good HVAC system in the headworks, gonna prevent corrosion and deterioration from, say, new handrails that we put in there? What are the components that really should be covered in that loan program, and then how much can we afford? Maybe it's just another $2 million. We've made a commitment on the capital side to always look at that plant. Like this year, we're gonna put $75,000 into it for, the computer controls. So we're always gonna augment the capital, but what big bites do we need? So that's where I envision the next step. If the consensus is research it, the guys will work with Robert and Bob, figure those questions out, and we come back and say, this is what it would look like. And again, I'll work with Mary, and maybe we can get in touch with CWT and see what they would say, once we start the process. We just need I need the direction that the board appreciates the fact that it's gonna have to be debt, there's no way around that. But how do we manage it? How much do we want? We may get to the point, Jay, we don't want to do anything. Okay. And then we know we have to go on the capital side. We still have this work that points us in the direction. We take smaller bites. That's my vision. I'm not wedded to it. That's just where I think we should go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we need for a project like this, we kind of work in both directions. We would need to understand what the town is going to commit to from a cost perspective, because that has to be in the application. And then generally what's going to be the details. Some of that we can work out later. It doesn't mean, we're not doing the design, we're not doing the design thing, we're just giving them an application that's going to include these kinds of things. The report would be back up, we would have a lot of information understanding how the town got there. So it's, it's the general project and look at cost, and then we'll be able to start on that.
And lastly, you said if we put in, that doesn't automatically guarantee that we have to progress with it, but I think if we put in and we don't progress with it, I think that that's a mistake, because then I think the next time you go to the well, there might be some hesitation, because, you put in the application and you backed out, and I don't think they like that too much.
They don't, a call from Jay to, the DEP,
Right, maybe
folks,
when that
it's a situation,
Yeah.
we're acting with, and you would have a reason why you did it.
Yeah.
You just feels like the town's living in good faith and stuff happens.
Yeah, right, okay.
Yeah. We do need to move quickly on this. August 21st is 3 weeks away, so, this is, for us, close to full picture. That's how we operate with it. It's time to go, yes, for sure.
I think we should proceed.
Okay,
The work's gotta be done.
okay.
We do it now, or when we could possibly get from, or stand on the road 5 years.
Kind of concur. I don't like to put the town in hot any more than it already is, but this community has been lacking in deferred maintenance for too long. We finally, I feel that we've put our money where our mouth has been, everything we said, we've done so far with the school, the roof here, you have to do things because, as I think, it's been mentioned many times, as time goes on, prices, they escalate, and they're gonna continue to do that. We're not gonna live in a world where you're gonna see prices lower, perhaps like in a commodity market like gas and things, but when you're talking about trades and pumps and things like that, they don't get cheaper. They never will, and chemicals and everything, component boards, computers, they just escalate in price. So, I think it's wise. I certainly would like to see Mary put things like our school we still owe, the flooding that problems we had, the wastewater treatment. I'd like to see how much money is we owe to bonds and grants and things like that. But I agree with Rick wholeheartedly that it's.
Our annual debt service right now is $626,940. That doesn't include the school.
Okay, it doesn't include the school, okay.
So, two things, that it doesn't cost us anything to apply, and we can walk away. For me, that gives me comfort, because we're researching it, and if we get to that point and say, well, that debt service went up way too much for us, worst case scenario is, we take that CIP, we do our own prioritization, and we decide at our capital program how much we want to put in the plan to get done. But looking at some of the individual items, like if you take that home and you look at it, there's some large chunk items in there, $300,000, and we have to kind of decide in-house with the plan and Robert, do we want to do those? And again, I would envision we're getting another presentation to say these are our menu options. What do we want to do not at all? What do we want to do on capital? What do we want to do as part of the loan? So there's no harm in doing it, and we can walk away. We're not locked into it. But we never research it, we don't know.
Plus, we're not guaranteed to put some of our own money in it. If we go to town meeting and people say, hey, we can't afford putting that much money in we just don't have it to put money into the wastewater treatment plant. So that's not a sure thing. So
I think if we hadn't had a bond with storm damage, the conversation would be a little different.
Yeah.
But you can't say that that wasn't important in it.
No.
It is. It's equally important. We're just pressed on the infrastructure side, and we just need to be smart, not bankrupt us, and not take on too much debt.
You just want to see, as far as bonds go, where we're gonna be in 2024? When this project finishes, then we're gonna have to start making payments. How many of those bonds are gonna be gone?
I don't know.
It sounds like, you'll have 1 year, if you don't roll it in, 1 year on the one bond, the 175. And there was the storm one, I don't think it was that long.
I think it's one of the 20.
You provide a list in the past, Mary does, we give you a complete list of every bond and how many years, what percent rate. I think we got that budget time. Complete list.
I thought there was some that.
Right, that's why I think at this point,
Fine, some that will into the police station, this and that, on all the
rate study.
full rate, but push it out 2 more years.
Rates, and then our goal is to communicate that to the community. And I also think, too, that as we move forward with the plan, the board begins to talk about it, that we should probably open it up for some level of state tours, so people can understand what's going on in the plan, what it does, and how it is.
I think leading up to it should be agreed that it should be brought to the public, you just don't want to, throw it out to them unexpectedly, that the reason we're doing it and why, because good PR helps a lot, because I think in the past, we haven't done that too well, we just roll things out and all of a sudden people are saying, hey, what the hell's going on here, And that's, people's right, and our town is pretty notorious for that kind of thing.
Jim, are you in agreement that we should move forward?
I think we should move forward. I think we should have Bob Rumble and probably Walt Gary give us a little more input into what would be a priority and what isn't a priority and move with that.
Okay, so it looks like, there's consensus. I heard from John, Joe, Rick, Jim, and myself.
Everybody should know that Bob was supposed to be here tonight, but he's not feeling well, so he stayed home, and he just wasn't feeling well, so he's moving in. But Time Bond has been at the plant on several visits, and Walt and Bob have been fully involved in this the entire way.
Did you hear that, Jim?
Yes, I did.
Okay. All right,
Just a separate entity, this is to Robert about solar, that's a whole different category. Solar, that's a whole different category. And I know there's funding for that, but, you know, you gotta, like a different part, you gotta find where it is, who you gotta talk to.
I think too, this plant isn't like our roadways and how we recognize that, I don't think they recognize the fact that this wastewater treatment and how important it is. We have kind of been kicking the can down the road, we haven't really been making the, upgrades that we should have been, and now it's basically time to pay. If we should decide not to go forward, we have some components that could fail at any time. We talked about a number of them, and then we might find ourselves in a situation where we have to do it. So I think that it's very important that we do take some kind of action. Again, we don't have to do the full 4.4 million or whatever. We can prioritize and we will go through that. But we need to pick that sweet spot in terms of what we can afford and what we can't do. So we'll take one step at a time and present that to you. If it's too much, we'll go back to the drawing board and reselect those items. We'll pick the most important ones.
Yeah, well, the drawing board, the side is liberty right now, gotta be a quick drawer. Things need to be in check by, what is it, August 21st? Yeah. So, and I have some powwows.
How much time you want? Talk more.
Next week. I'm gonna let, Robert kind of drive that.
Yeah, we can do the paperwork together with the grand also.
I had a couple of thoughts, sitting here tonight, a couple of big ticket items. Section of the plant, but we'll let, I know too much to be named.
all right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate Chris and Miles being here and going through.
Thank you all.
Very much appreciated.
Thanks for having us.
Yep.
Absolutely.
The company's got a pretty good reputation.
Well, what do you guys?
Yep.
Appreciate it.
And Robert, can I ask if you told them if they're going out the front door, because I did lock the door?
I'm gonna walk out.
You're gonna walk out? Okay, great, thank you.
Miles wants to see my 57 quarter.
Got it. You all have fun. So,
Thank you.
thank
Yeah,
you.
see you guys, have a safe trip back.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to put back in front of the board, the subcommittees and liaison assignments. These were the, annual assignments, and they were, made last year around this time. So not for major discussion tonight, but I wanted you all to take a look at it and think through, what assignments you had this past year, which ones you'd like to continue, and we can put this on probably next week's agenda to just finalize. I did hear from Jim, indicating that he would like to step down as the liaison to the Adams Arts Advisory Board, so if that is something someone is interested in, that is available. That is an option. I did notice here, John, you didn't add on here the BRPC, alternate seat that you hold, as part of our board, so I just want to make sure that that's added here. Joe, I noticed Conservation and Agricultural Commission is actually combined on this list, those actually should be separated out.
Yep.
So I will make sure that that gets separated going forward. And Jim also indicated that, his alternate seat as a commissioner for the Northern Berkshire Solid Waste Management, something that we did point, probably mid-year this past year, it wouldn't make it onto this list. So we'll make sure that that's added to the list. But if you also take a look at this, let me or Jay know if there are any changes that you'd like to make, based on your schedule or interest, that would help for next week.
I would just like, an additive, I see that, you know, you have Berkshire Regional Planning, I'd like to encompass within this, the Mohawk Trail Woodlands Partnership.
I did write that down here. I'm sorry, what is your position with the Mohawk?
Well, I'm on the executive committee.
That's what I wanted to, thank you. Thank you very much. I have a note here saying, ask Joe what the official title is, so, thank you.
Yep.
Yep. And this is the list that, lives on the town's website under the Board of Selectmen section of the website, so that people know all of the different committees that we're on, and liaison appointments, if anyone just, want to do that research. I just want to put that in front of you. With that, announcements and good as the order. Joe?
I would just like to have, I don't know if it should be an executive session, but I'd like to have a discussion with the overtime that we've paid in the last 5 years to the police and the highway department. I know that you haven't, you know, just talk about it, because it's encompassing an awful large amount of money, an awful lot. And I don't know what to say, how to change it, but something has to be done. Last year was the most money paid in overtime for the police and the highway department. It's bothersome to me because, you know, most communities, the highway department budgets were, there was leftover money in most communities throughout the state, and we maxed out, and it wasn't even a bad winter. I know, you know, extenuating circumstances, things happen on weekends and that, but you know, we have to find some type of a compromise. I don't know what venue it should be in, executive session or, you know, the public to hear. I let the board make that decision, but I think it's something that we need to talk about.
I will look into it. I think it would have to be a public, meeting, public discussion. I don't believe that can be handled in executive session, but I will look into it and get back to you.
Okay?
And you were looking for a 5-year review, you said, correct?
Yeah, I don't know, I asked Mary early on for that, and she just gave 1 year, and I saw her again. I don't want to make a big thing out of it, but, you know, it's our town employees and things, but, you know, that's a big bite out of our budget. If you saw it, everybody, I think, got in their mailbox, and you saw how much we paid the police and the highway department for overtime last year.
And I know that, the 2 new department heads for those 2, departments that you mentioned have been charged with, managing that
Right.
line item. And I know that they both have been working toward that.
Okay,
So,
great. Yep.
but no point taken. Anything else, Joe?
No, that's it.
Okay, Rick?
Okay,
John?
good.
Jim, anything under announcements and good of the order?
I attended a Zoom meeting for the Northern Berkshire Community Coalition. It was on food resources and the future of food resources. It was a very good meeting. Well attended. I believe there was 47 people that signed in on it. So things are starting to pick up a little bit, and I'm kind of glad of that.
I didn't hear that. What was the meeting about? I didn't hear you. The meeting, the coalition meeting, what was the topic of discussion?
Food distribution.
Okay, yeah.
You know, there's 47 people, a lot of good ideas came out of it. Like I said, I'm glad to see that these meetings are starting to come to fruition again. Not, you know, it's a great thing to see. As far as liaison, I would like to stick with all the liaisons I have, except for the arts. I just don't have the,
I don't have the time. You
I don't have
told
the
me
time.
to talk about it. Thanks, Jim. So while I have all of you here, we do need to schedule a hearing I'm looking at the dates of August 10th or August 11th, probably at 6 p.m. It is, a dog hearing. It is, the same owner and same dog that we met with back in October 2018. There has been another incident in our community, and so we do need to address it. It is, been formally requested by the police chief that this board hold a public hearing. I do need to communicate with the owner. I have the, draft letter from legal counsel, and we need to give at least 7 days notice to the owner of the public hearing. That's why I'm looking at August 10th or 11th. That's a Monday or a Tuesday. I would like to hold this meeting in person as best as we can. So I'm not sure of the location because we will have definitely more than 10 people. So if the date doesn't work, if a hearing that is uncomfortable and you feel like you won't be able to vote, I would ask that maybe you not be in the room and maybe call in. Because I'd like to have the owners here, I'd like to have the animal control officers here who responded to the incident, and I would like to have the police chief in the room. So, let me know. I don't know, does anyone have a preference on Monday or Tuesday? I'm looking at 6 p.m.
I was just wondering now, is this the one up in Sigsville, Hathaway Street, or the one on Winter Street?
Graylock Ave.
Graylock Avenue.
This is the
Yeah.
last case that this board saw, which is October 2018.
Would you, please provide to the board the minutes,
All of the documents?
all the documentation in the direction that was the board had, voted?
Yes.
I'd like to see those, I'd like the whole board to have all this minutes.
So it'll be, yes, we already pulled all of that information. So when I have the letter, finalized to go to the individuals that we're asking to come before us, included in that information to the board will be that letter, the minutes, and the follow-up letter that was sent to the, individuals, the owner, indicating all of the steps that they needed to take.
Yeah, we were,
Also understood that, he had moved out of the area for, I think last year, he had moved to another community, which he has since moved back with the dog, and there's been an incident.
yeah, because I think we were lax in following up on that. I think that was the problem, but I did realize, as you just mentioned, that he did leave the area, but I didn't realize he came back in same dog, same incident. Okay.
Similar incident.
Yeah.
But yeah, and the chief will explain all of that. So again, in the packet, I should add that I will have the formal request from the police chief, as part of the packet, so that you will also see what he has requested. So, if you're all okay with either date, the 10th or the 11th at 6 p.m., what I will do is I will follow up with the animal control officer and find out her availability.
Has there been anything done now to avoid this, any other incidences before we meet, or do we need to be soon?
Unfortunately, legal counsel tells me I have to wait 7 days for the notice. But,
All right, it's good, notice being delivered, 7 minutes, I got you.
yeah, that's the issue. The owner is aware of what could possibly come of the hearing based on our last hearing and the information that he received. That's part of what he explained to the animal control officer when she responded. It's not going to be an easy meeting. None of them are. But so if that's okay, then I will go back and ask him for availability. The chief made dinner and told me that either date works, and I'm hearing either date works. Or is that okay with your work schedule?
Yeah, we're both there, but it's fine.
If the class is okay, so I figured, right?
Yeah.
Earlier is a little bit tough, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm really good.
Doing my best to be mindful of your work schedule. Okay. All right. Unfortunately, it wasn't like a great announcement. I don't have anything else, so if there's nothing else.
Motion to adjourn.
A motion is a second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you again for,
It's gotta be a
calling.
roll call because he's on,
I know.
darn. Okay, close enough. All right, good night.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good night, Tim.
Good night.